In the allowance method, there are two ways to come up with the estimate. Now, everything we've done so far is a review. This is new, so you want to pay attention to this part. There are two ways to estimate uncollectible accounts. The first way is called percent of sales, okay? And there's going to be a formula here, and the formula is going to be a percent of sales, I promise, okay? So in the first method, you're going to know that bad debt expense equals some percent that's going to be given to you times sales. And in this method, you'll calculate the exact amount used for the adjusting entry. What is the adjusting entry again? It's always the same no matter which method you use to estimate. It's a debit to bad debt expense and credit to allowance for doubtful accounts. And we have to figure out the amount. In this example, we don't know the amount of the adjusting entry, okay? So this is the percent of sales method to estimate uncollectible. So turn to the top of page 410, and it's going to give us some information. It's going to say the balance of accounts receivable, and on the top of 410 is what? Y'all see where I am? Balance of accounts receivable is what? Okay, the balance for allowance for a doubtful accounts is what? $3,250, and that's a credit balance. So this is at the end of the year before adjustments are made. You have a balance of $3,250, and total credit sales are what? $3 million. And it says bad debt as a percent of credit sales is 3/4%. Okay, so 3/4 of 1%, if you were going to type that in your calculator or punch it in your calculator, you would need to put 3 million times 0.0075. Because that's 3/4 of 1%, okay? If you were going to type in 1% on your calculator, what would you type in? 0.01, right? If you were going to type in 1/2 of 1%, you would type in 0.005, and 3/4 of 1% would be 0.0075, okay? That 3/4 of a percent does not mean 75%, okay? 75%, if you have a business and you don't collect 75% of your receivables, you will go out of business, okay? So this is only 3/4 of 1%. That's going to be given to you every time, the percentage will, okay? So y'all key that in your calculator and tell me what you get. Okay, 22,500. Well, if you took notes up here, you know that in this you calculate the exact amount used for the adjusting entry. So you just calculated the amount that we're going to use. So come up here to the journal entry. You're going to debit bad debt expense for 22,500, and you're going to credit allowance for doubtful accounts for 22,500. So at the end of this year, accounts receivable will equal 240,000. After the adjusting entry is posted, bad debt expense will equal what? 22,500. So you calculated the exact amount of bad debt expense. Do y'all see that? What is your adjusted balance of your allowance account now after adjustments? $22,500 plus the ending balance, $3,250, gives you an adjusted balance of $25,750. So if I wanted to find the net realizable value of accounts receivable, what would that be? $240,000 minus what, Jamal? The contra asset account, which is $25,750. So how much will I probably collect on that accounts receivable? It's $240 minus $25,170.
$214,800. What? I was trying.
$240,000 minus $25,750.
$214,250.
That is the net realizable value of your accounts receivable using which method? It's the allowance method, and then to use the estimate, we use the percent of sales method. Okay. We're going to call it aging of receivables, okay? And the book refers to it as both names. Aging means what? Getting older. If someone owes you money, the longer that debt is outstanding, the more time passes, would you say that you're less likely to get your money? Yeah, okay. I have one friend that if I'm at Kroger and she needs something from Kroger, you know, and I'm on the phone with her, do you need something from Kroger? She'll get it. I mean, she'll tell me what it is and I'll pick it up for her. She'll come to my house right then and bring me a $5 bill or write me a check for $12 or whatever. She immediately pays that right then. Okay? So I never mind picking up anything at Kroger for her, right? Okay? What? You need a friend like that, right? Somebody's going to go to Kroger for you or somebody's going to pay you back. Either one. Okay. So here, aging of accounts receivable, you're going to look at how long the debt has been outstanding, okay? So here's what I want you to write down first. You're going to use a chart. You're going to look at a chart, and the chart will tell you the estimated uncollectible accounts. Okay? That number in the chart is going to equal, the number in the chart is going to equal the adjusted balance of your allowance account. The number in the chart is going to equal the adjusted balance in the allowance account. Okay? So look at the chart on page 411. So going back to our notes, we're on page 412, 411, 412. The chart on page 411 tells you that $26,490, that's in the bottom left-hand part of the chart, tells you that $26,490 is your estimate of what? What does it say there? Uncollectible accounts. Y'all see where it says that in the chart? Bottom of 411, the bottom left of the chart. Estimate of uncollectible accounts. And then what I want you to know is that that number is going to equal the adjusted balance of what account? Allowance for doubtful accounts. And the book told us there's a beginning balance in allowance for doubtful accounts of a credit balance of $32.50. And so here, we're going to put that adjusted balance of that T account at the bottom, $26,490, and you're going to have to solve for the amount that goes in the adjusting entry. We already know the adjusting entry, so we already know what to debit and credit. We're going to debit bad debt expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts. But you have to figure out, using this method, aging of accounts receivable, what your adjusting entry is. So you're going to take the difference between the adjusted balance and the unadjusted balance, and we figured that out already. It's going to need a credit of what? $23,240, $23,240, $23,240 will be your adjusting entry. And when you post that adjusting entry, your bad debt expense for the year is what? For the whole year, what's your bad debt expense? $23,240, okay? Your adjusted balance of allowance for doubtful accounts is how much? $26,490. And then accounts receivable hasn't changed. It's going to be $240,000. That's 9.3A, the percent of sales method. And this is on page 427. Y'all see where I am? At the end of the year, accounts receivable has a balance of what? $685,000. The allowance account has a balance of what? $9,000 debit or credit balance? Credit balance. Net sales for the year total what? And bad debt expense is estimated as 3/4 of 1% of sales. So we're going to multiply sales by what amount? 0.0075. And that number is going to give us bad debt expense. So what do you get? $7,400,000 times 0.0075. Okay? I hear $55,500. Did everybody get that? All right. In part A, the first question, it says determine the amount of the adjusting entry for uncollectible accounts. What is your adjusting entry? You debit. If you don't learn anything else today, you're going to know the adjusting entry, right? Debit bad debt expense, credit allowance for doubtful accounts for what amount? Well, in this method, percent of sales method, you figure out the exact amount. So we just plug that in, $55,500. And that $55,500 is your answer to part A. Part B is going to ask you your ending balances, your adjusted balances. So let's post this entry to some T accounts, okay? You debit bad debt expense. I need to create a T account for that. You debit it for what? $55,500. So your adjusted balance is $55,500 for bad debt expense. When you credit allowance for doubtful accounts for $55,500, what is your adjusted balance of allowance for doubtful accounts? $64,500. Did you make any changes to your accounts receivable account? No, so the adjusted balance is $685,000. So accounts receivable will go on your balance sheet as an asset for $685,000. But if we want to know the net realizable value, we're going to take accounts receivable, $685,000, minus that allowance account.
$620,500.
And then bad debt expense is going to go on what financial statement? Expense? Income statement, right? Once again, accounts receivable has a balance of what? $685,000. So we're using the same numbers, but we're using a different method to calculate the adjusting entry, okay? So 4A says accounts receivable has a balance of $685,000. Allowance for doubtful account, what's the balance? Debit or credit? $9,000. And net sales for the year total $7 million. Okay, net sales $7,400,000. Okay, if you look at the title of this problem, practice exercise 9.4a, what do you see in bold? Okay, and I told you that can also be called the aging of receivables. Did we use net sales and aging of receivables? We used a chart. Remember? So this part is here to throw you off. Okay, the net sales amount, we're not going to use that. Using the aging method, so you want to think about using the chart. The balance of allowance for doubtful accounts is estimated to be $50,000. So that's going to give us the adjusted balance of your allowance account. So we need a T account, and we've got one up here for allowance for doubtful accounts. The adjusted balance needs to equal $50,000. How much does the adjustment need to be? A debit or credit? Needs to be a credit of how much? $41,000. Because a credit plus a credit equals a bigger credit, right? So our adjusting entry, you know it by heart, it's going to be a debit to bad debt expense, a credit to allowance for doubtful accounts, for what amount? $41,000. It's not the amount in the chart. The amount in the chart is what you're going to use to find the adjusting entry, okay? So the amount, part A says determine the amount of the adjusting entry for uncollectible accounts. That would be $41,000. Does everybody see that? Part A. Part B, I'm going to go up here and look at the T accounts because it says determine the amount of the adjusted balances for these three accounts. Accounts receivable, allowance for doubtful accounts, and bad debt expense. Well, when I post the adjusting entry, what is my debit to bad debt expense? $41,000. So this year on my income statement, how much bad debt expense do I have? $41,000. Okay? Accounts receivable was not adjusted, so the balance is $685,000. Allowance for doubtful account, the balance is $50,000. And your balance in bad debt expense is $41,000. Those are your answers for part B because it asks you for all three. And in part C, it says what is the net realizable value of accounts receivable? And you're going to take your accounts receivable, which is $685,000. Let me move this up. Less your allowance account, which is, it started out as $9,000. Now what is it? My adjusted balance is, wait, look at the adjusted balance. Oh, y'all can't see it. The adjusted balance is going to be at the very end. It's your unadjusted balance plus your adjusting entry that you posted is going to be 50,000. So you're going to take out 50,000. So your net realizable value, how much money you're probably going to actually get, is $635,000. And that is the answer to part C. Any questions there on this? Okay, so that's practice exercise 9 for